I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked. Now, if you're pursuing a career, this show is for you because this show is all about opening possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you have options from which to choose. Now, speaking of choices, I am delighted that you chose to be with us today. Our topic is reflections from listening, and I think you will be surprised. Now, because of this show, I have had the opportunity to listen a great deal. In addition, in my career as a management consultant, a mentor, a teacher, and a researcher, I have spent hours and hours listening to others. You can't really have a conversation with someone or understand what is being said unless you're committed to listening to what they are saying. I enjoy listening very much. And the greatest reward for this is getting to know some extraordinary people. For example, I had the honor of sitting with an opera singer who was talking about how he completely transformed the way he taught others to sing when he realized that the key was not the technique, but rather to help them find their voice. What a lesson for the teacher as well as the student. As I listen, I am aware that I must keep my mind on what my partner is saying. I must not think of how I will respond or what new idea springs to mind or what I'm going to cook for dinner. Moreover, after we talk, I try to remind myself to allow time to reflect on what I have just heard, which I like to call gathering, because it's like gathering the ingredients for a meal. You know, each ingredient may be good, but it's in the mixture and the cooking and the eating and even the digestion that the full goodness is achieved. Reflection takes time and effort if it is going to feed us. And today we're going to be talking about reflection from listening with my guest, Kay Lindahl. We're going to take a short break now so that you can think about the questions you would like to ask Kay, and be sure to post them in YouTube or LinkedIn, and I'll check for them during the show. So stay tuned. Welcome back. You're listening to Unlocked. I'm Madelyn Blair, your host. My guest today is Kay Lindahl. Welcome, Kay, to Unlocked.
Thank you, Madelyn. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Oh, great. It's fabulous to have you here. Now, I want to tell the audience a little bit about you, and then we'll jump in. Kay Lindahl is an author, founder of multiple organizations, not just one, a giver to the public and religious spokesperson. She attributes writing as her form of meditation, seeing it as a mystical process. I love that one because there's so much that happens when you're writing.
Mm.
This is reflective of her successful, insightful books, all centered around spirituality, leadership, and most of all, the power of listening. She's the founder of the Listening Center in Long Beach, California. She's former ambassador for the Council for the Parliament of the World's Religions, and she's co-founder of Women of Spirit and Faith. She's on the board of directors of the Interfaith Observer and the Rumi Education Center. Wow. This list goes on and on, but I do have to mention one of your books, which I love. Just the title alone. How Does God Listen? I loved that. What a productive life. And again, it is such an honor to have you with me, Kay.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation. It's you have such rich conversations with people, and I know that you will evoke that in this one as well.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'd like to begin by asking you to talk about your purpose and how you came to be what you are today.
Well, that is a lifelong question.
Well, let's see, we have 40 minutes.
Yes. Well, it's interesting to think about that, though, because my journey has been filled with twists and turns that I never could have anticipated. And I think that's true for most people, but it seems that I've had 4 or 5 different careers and over the course of my life, and that I didn't know at the time that they were all interconnected. Because they don't sound too interconnected. I was a registered nurse, and then I had my 5 children, so I was at home, and I worked with La Leche League International for a number of years, and then I became a certified financial planner, and then I came in, and I've been very engaged in the interfaith movement and done that. I'm an ordained interfaith minister, and then now I'm doing this listening work. But what I noticed through the thread through all of that is teaching. And when I was in high school, which is a long, long time ago, it was in the 50s, the only careers open for women, for the most part, were teaching, nursing, or secretaries. And my guidance counselor told me one day, she said, "I think you'd be a great teacher." And I was like, no, I don't want to be a teacher. And I think my vision of being a teacher was someone who was in a classroom all the time.
Yeah, right.
And that's not been my path, obviously. I've not been in a classroom, but everything I've done has really been in a role of teaching in one form or another. And everything that I have done has led me to where I am now. It's just, nothing's wasted. I've taken things from all the various aspects of my life and brought them forward with me. And so I guess if there was one thing I could say, it's like being open and ready to say yes when these twists and turns come around.
Oh, I love that story, and to be willing to say yes, because that's when things really open up. And I also loved your story about your guidance counselor. My guidance counselor told me that I should be an ornamental horticulturist. I didn't know what that meant, but at the time it would have been to work in a flower shop and arrange flowers. But my mother said no, that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I took a very different path. But I will tell you this. I love flowers, and I'm making flower arrangements in the house all the time. So
she saw something. Yeah. It's amazing. And another thing I'll say that in at least 2 or 3 instances, other people saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And thus I got invited to do these things. And, with all my fear and trepidation, I said yes. And then found out, well, yeah, this is what I meant to do right now.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, part of the topic of the title of our talk is that reflection piece. And I often think that businesses don't comprehend that there's a difference between reflecting and just thinking. I wonder if you would sort of comment on that.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right in the first place. And I think the reflection, is I have so many things I want to say about it, but let's see. Let's start. I'll start with that. For me, reflection is about getting to know your own voice, getting to know your inner voice. So
Mm,
there's an aspect to reflection that's helping us to discover that which is in within us. That is oftentimes we aren't aware of it until we go through the process of saying, "Well, wait a minute. Let me just reflect on this for a moment." And that takes time, and it takes sometimes silence. And so it's really, in the business world, and I noticed it in the health field, that there's not a value for people to take time to do the reflection. It's not valued in the corporate culture.
right.
And what's valued is the thinking, the quick response. And it's, for me, it's like one of the ways I talk about reflection is like it's about thinking from the heart, that we have thinking from the head, which is what action and getting things done, which is important. I mean, I'm not
Absolutely.
dismissing that at all. And the other part of that, though, is thinking from the heart. How do we get to the heart of things? How do we open up our heart messages? And that is through the process, for me, of reflection. So we
Mm,
take the time to reflect, and it's we we take time out. Actually, we have to take. It's almost like I need a time out so I can reflect on something.
mhm. I think that oddly, the COVID pandemic gave us some time. We didn't not necessarily use it well, but
Mhm,
there were times I noticed for myself that I had more sitting time where I could reflect if I chose to. Yeah,
mhm,
because I was no longer on the road, driving around or whatever.
mhm, mhm.
Thank you for that. There's another topic about another part of our discussion today, and that's this thing called listening,
Mhm,
because that has to, in a way, that has to come first. So,
mhm.
or does it always come first? Let me ask you that.
I think it does. I think, and there's a saying, by John of the Cross, that listening is God's first language,
Ah,
and it's out of the listening that comes the word. So silence and listening precedes language and words. And so that as a basis for this particular conversation, and the focus in the Western world has so much been in communication, has been so focused on the speaking part of communication and not the listening part. And there's some interesting statistics about communication, and they say that we spend about 50% of our time listening and 25% of our time talking. That then the other 25% of our time we're out of the is we're sleeping or doing something, but we really listen more than we speak, statistically speaking. And so we it's and yet we have not paid attention to that aspect. We think, what can I say? How can I prepare to speak? And the focus of my work is how can I prepare to listen? What are things that I can do to prepare myself to listen? And
mhm.
that's just not something we ordinarily think about. And yet it's that space, the that silence creates a space in which someone else can speak their truth and know that they are being heard. By the way we listen has a profound impact on the speaker. And it's Douglas Steer says, he's a Quaker, he says, to listen another soul into a condition of discovery and disclosure may be almost the greatest service any
Mm.
human being ever performs for another.
Oh, wow.
So that's quite a powerful statement
It
about the
is.
power of listening.
It is. As you said that, I, what I imagined in my mind was you are, you are giving this person an opportunity to be born.
Yes, yes. In fact, I one of the ways I talk about it is that we become the midwives for
Ah,
someone else's thinking. by
Oh,
the way we listen, the power of our listening, by that create holding that space for that person where it's safe for them to say what it is they have to say. And sometimes what they say things that they didn't even know that they had inside themselves to say, but by the power of the space we create with our listening, they can say these things, and it's just transformative. It
wow.
really makes a huge difference.
You know, storytellers, we often think of storytellers as telling the story. But
Mhm,
when you talk um, to the real, I'll call them the real storytellers, the ones
mhm.
who really thought about what they're doing, they say, no, no, no. The audience listens the story out of you.
Absolutely. Yes, 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 you can, it's like one of the things that I asked people to think about. I said, how many times have you said, "Oh, that was a great speech. I love what that person said." How many times, though, have you ever said, "That was a great listening in that room"? Weren't people really listening? I mean, we just have forgotten about that. And that's so true. I've experienced it myself, and I'm sure you have too when you're speaking. That that's why Zoom is harder, because it doesn't. It comes, but it's not quite the same as in person. The energy is more direct, I guess, when you're in person. But you feel the listening, and
You
then
do.
you can speak into that,
Yeah.
and it's a dance. It's a back and
It
forth
is.
between the speaker and the listener,
Yeah.
and even in large audiences, it's the same thing.
Oh, I think it is, to me, it's especially in large audiences
Mhm,
because I'll just call it the energy that comes from the audience when they're really engaged in what you're saying
mhm,
is it totally energizes. You don't get tired until
mhm.
afterwards. Then you
Yeah,
get tired.
exactly. Yes, yes. I've
Oh,
had the same experience. It's wonderful. Yeah.
wow. Well, I think it's important then to really explore how you help people listen, because clearly you understand this. But
Mm.
how do you help others really learn how to listen?
Well, one of the things that I've noticed over the past 25 years that I've been doing this work is that my work really focuses more on the preparation than the how to. There are a
Ah,
lot of great how to ways of processes and practices out there. It's I can't think of the name of it right now, but yeah, there are a lot. There's nonviolent communication. There's the kind of listing that Carl Rogers was talking about. That's escaping me. What did he call it?
I don't remember either.
Ah, this is what happens when you live a
Well,
long time too. But
that's right. Well, there's also
anyway,
active listening.
active listening. Yeah.
There's appreciative listening. Yeah.
Yes, all that. So one of the things that I do is I set a context for listening and to preparing to listen that might be something that helps people. And I say that we in looking at listening as an art and a choice and a gift. So there are three different ways of looking at listening that we don't often think about. And so listening as an art, well, what does that mean? So what that means to me is that if I remember a time when someone was really listening to me, they weren't, like you said in the beginning, you weren't thinking about what somebody else, what you were going to say, what you were going to do, what was you going to cook for dinner, all that. You were simply there, very attentive, listening. And what does that feel like for the person being listened to? And most people say it feels nurturing. It feels love. They feel loved. They feel heard. They feel validated. There are just all kinds of feelings that people have around that when they are listened to in that way. And so there's a quote by Martin Buber. He says, "When two people listen to each other authentically, God is the electricity that surges between them."
Oh,
And it's like that those when you are in those kinds of moments,
yeah.
time stands still. You're
Yeah.
just not aware of anything other than being there.
Yeah.
So listening as an art is about being. So it shifts listening from something we do to something we be. And so we become that listening presence. We become a listener. We be a listener instead of doing listening. So that's one of the ways I look at listening that is shifting the context of listening.
I really, really enjoy how you describe that. Oftentimes, when I talk about facilitating a group, I say to them, I'm only here to act as your container. I will
Mhm,
hold this I will contain you, hold
mhm,
you in this as you do your work.
mhm.
It's very much about what you're talking about, this creation of a
Excellent.
space. Uh,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, and holding the container creates a safe space for
yes,
people. When people know that someone's holding the container, they
mhm,
know that it's safe to speak.
that's right.
It's so that and that is one of the primary, reasons that people don't speak out a lot is they don't feel safe.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's a very important aspect of listening, is to create holding that space and creating that
Holding that
space.
space. Yeah. Uh, at Columbia, when I taught there, a lot of what we talked about was creating that kind of what was called psychologically safe
Mhm,
places for people. And for business people, they resist initially,
mhm,
and then when they see and feel themselves the the innovation, the creativity that comes out when they have that sense of safety,
mhm.
they convert for it pretty quickly. And it takes
Yes,
a while to learn how to actually do it and consistently, but
yes.
but they understand it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Peter Senge did a lot of work in that arena, and,
Mm.
one of the things that I like about his work is in terms of, dialogue and discussion, that there's a distinction between dialogue and discussion. And dialogue it comes from the Greek dialogos, through the word, and it's really an exploration. It's a looking at what might be possible, so maybe some new things come in here. It's a different way of thinking about it. Whereas discussion comes from the Latin discutere, to shake apart, literally. And a discussion is where you have to come up with some answers. You're problem solving. You have an agenda, and so they're both legitimate kinds of conversations. And we usually don't distinguish them, and so we mush back and forth. And then sometimes I think we're in a dialogue, you think we're in a discussion. You're chomping at the bit because we're not coming up with any answers, and I'm saying, what's her rush? you know but what Peter Senge did was he taught in business, taught people how to have a dialogue prior to having a discussion.
Ah,
And
yes.
so they took the time, because it takes a little bit more time to have well, so what do we think about this? What do you think? What's going on? Let's have a conversation, then go into the discussion. Well, okay, what are we going to do about it? What they found was that when they got to the discussion part, everything went much more quickly. There was more efficient. People knew, everybody had a sense of what, people had a chance to speak. And then they came in here and said, oh, okay, well, this makes sense now. Given all that, let's do this and this and this.
Yeah.
And so in the long run, it saves time. But in the short run, it seems like, oh, why are we wasting this hour
Yeah.
having a dialogue when we should really be doing the work?
Yeah.
But, and that you can apply that in many other situations as well. But I love that distinction.
It's great. It's absolutely great. It reminds me of a tiny book. I mean, the book is only about this big,
Hmm.
by Theodore Zeldin, and he's talking about conversation. And of
Hmm.
course, conversation really means in its root to just turn around together. You're just exploring together.
Hmm.
It's a form of dialogue. But
Right.
what Zeldin uses the word conversation, and he says there is, the true conversation is when you enter into it with the intention that you are willing to change your mind.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
absolutely have never forgotten that
Yeah,
that definition.
that's a great wisdom,
Yeah.
in that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Ah,
agree. Yeah.
well, you also in your work talk about listening as a sacred art.
Mhm.
What does it mean? And how can people bring that into their everyday lives? And we are so busy. I mean, and you're a mother of 5 children. You know what it's like to have to manage a house with 5 children. Um, so talk about that.
Yeah, well, it relates to what I said about the art of listening, that, those moments when, and that Buber quote, when you just are so present with another that there's something happens there, it's kind of out of time and space in that sense. It's like people call about, I mean, artists call about it as ecstasy, and jazz musicians talk about it as being in the groove, or sometimes people in sports talk about it being in the zone. There are those moments that
Yeah.
are out of time, and for me, I call those moments sacred. Some people call them
Ah,
holy. Other people have other names for them, but it's that sense, whatever name you have for that. That's why I call it sacred, because something happens there. It's more than just you and somebody else. There's a third entity, or a third something there, and that to me is what makes it sacred. And those
ah. Well,
things.
sacred really just means to be set apart.
Hmm.
So, in a way, as you describe the zone for the athletes and etc. Um, and I'm also thinking of two young lovers. I
Hmm.
mean, time never exists to two
Right.
young lovers,
Right.
and they so intense. Ah, I love it. And those moments are set apart from our normal day to day.
Hmm.
So, how do we bring it more into the day to day?
Well, that's the lifelong question, and it's one thing that I have been really thinking about a lot, and I think a lot of it is awareness, just being aware and taking like mini retreats or mini moments in the day when you
Mm,
just notice something. And like I look out of a window here, and sometimes I'll just notice the birds, and to me that becomes a sacred moment.
ah,
And or sometimes when I'm turning on the water and I get hot water, that's a sacred moment, because not everybody has hot water
ah,
in this planet. And I think so, just it's taking the everyday and
ah,
just looking at it from a point of awareness about, wow, look at this. And that to me, whenever it's like a wow moment, it's like that's sacred. Or when
mm,
I'm awestruck by something, that's a sacred moment. I think we have them a lot, but we're not aware of them. And it's just lifting those moments up to our consciousness and saying, "Oh, wow, that was really sacred moment. I really it fed me in some way. I feel more alive because
mm.
I was aware of that moment."
As you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, as you describe it, we all have the opportunity
Mhm,
for these sacred moments.
mhm.
It's not something that we earn or have to work toward. They're
Right.
there. And so it is a matter of just pausing and long enough to recognize it and
Mhm,
then to have the joy of it. Uh,
mhm.
oh, this is so exciting to me because so many people get wrapped into they don't have time, they don't have time, they don't have time. And as a result, I think they've lost their sense of presence.
Yes, yes, and that so much of what I do is about becoming more present, and just the awareness, because once we become aware of something, then we can do more of that, and we
Yeah.
can we can acknowledge it, whatever that is, whatever we're present to, in a different way, and that is what for me makes a full and rich life, by acknowledging everything as much as possible.
Ah. Well, we talked about people feeling that they're so busy, and that gets in the way. Are there other things that you feel are real issues that when people are trying to listen more and more consciously, that get in the way?
Well, we live in a world in which everything has to be done now and faster than ever, and so a lot of it is because we are multitasking, or we think we're multitasking, because
Mm.
literally the brain cannot do two things at the same time. It has to work very hard because it does things sequentially. But that's why so many times we're so exhausted, because we're trying to do so many things all at the same time, and our brains are going working as hard as they can, and it takes a lot of energy, so we get tired. So one of the ways that we can sort of stop this cycle is to really take some time out. Again, just be aware and take a time out and just have a moment when you stop this, because I think there's something called CPA. It's a syndrome which is made up by the people in the communications field, and it's called continuous partial attention.
Ah,
It's like we're continuously paying partial attention to everything, and we're not paying full attention to anything. So the practice is to take on unitasking.
yep.
And instead of doing multitasking, which we have to do from time to time. I know there's a lot of things we need to get done in our work and in our daily lives as well. But sometimes just say, you know what? I need to unitask for a while. I'm just going to do one thing, and I'm going to focus on that. And in truth, when I do that, I get a lot more done, because I go from one thing, then I go to the next thing, then I go to the next thing. And so instead of thinking I've got all these things to do, I think I've got one thing to do.
Yeah.
I've got one thing to do. I got one thing to do. And it just makes things go more smoothly.
I can tell you it does. One of the practices that I recommend in my book on Unlocked is to decide each morning the most important thing to do that day and do it.
Mhm.
I said, Madelyn, you have to take your own advice. So, I mean, I move very fast and I get a lot done. And I said, no, you're going to do the thing. Even if it takes 4 hours, you are going to focus on it. I was astounded at what I accomplished, just as you said. And I think it does have to do with the fact that your mind and brain is working on one thing. And the other thing about it is that when you have to make that choice, it actually builds that capacity within you to make tough choices. And when resilience comes, when you're hit with the unexpected, you've got to make a choice, and that gets you ready for that. So, I just love this.
Yeah. Well, it's like a practice. I mean, all of life is like a practice in many ways, but just practicing awareness, practicing doing one thing at a time, and just looking at it as a practice and not as some, big thing that you have to do, but it's practice. And if we want to get good at anything, what do? We practice. So
that's right. Well, speaking of practicing, is there something we might do? I love doing demonstrations on the show so that people, I've been embarrassed sometimes, but hey, that's okay. Is there something we could do?
Well, one of the practices that I would like to share with you is a minute of silence. And it's one I do in all of my workshops. I always, and even my presentations, I will, when I'm just giving a talk or something, I will stop and do this little practice on silence, because there really is no listening without silence. Silence is a precursor to listening, as we said right in the very beginning. And the society that we live in is not very conducive to silence, where there's noise all over the place. We're busy doing things, and we have a lot going on in our lives. So one of the practices that I invite people to get into is just to take 1 minute a day. That's all, just 1 minute a day, where they are intentionally silent, to just be in a quiet space and see what happens. And so I'm going to invite you to do that now. And I have a lovely, there's a timer, an app that I have on my phone that I can just make it will produce a chime at the beginning of a minute. And I can set it for however long I want to. And then there'll be a chime at the end of the minute. So we're going to do that right now. We're just going to take a minute to be in the silence and to see what happens when we are intentionally silent. And I invite you to sit comfortably wherever you are. Put your feet on the floor, perhaps, so that you are balanced in your sitting. And then take a deep breath. Just take one nice, long, deep breath in. And then we will spend this 1 minute together in silence. You'll hear the gong. So that's a minute.
That is a minute.
And
It's amazing how long it is when you're aware of it.
yes. Well, and for some people, they'll say, "Oh, that was really short." People have very different responses to this. Some will say, I didn't notice anything." Some people say, my mind was just going constantly." Some people say, "I almost fell asleep." So everybody has a different response to this minute of silence. What was it like for you, Madeline?
Uh, well, let's see. All I could think of was my producer who says, "Now, Madeline, you must not have silence on the show." And I said, "No, no, we're going to stay with this. We're going to
Yeah.
stay with this. If somebody happens to click on, they're going to see two people on the screen, and hopefully they'll stay long enough that
Yeah.
they're there when we come back together." That was kind of what was flitting through.
Go-
And
Yeah.
then just about the time I thought, this is really long, the gong went off.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, we find, and so many people find that their minds are going constantly, and it's like to just sort of, but it takes but only a minute sometimes to sort of just slow it down for a little bit. Because the average attention span of an adult in the United States, anyway, in Canada, North America, is 7 seconds.
it keeps going down.
Yeah, it was 22 seconds when I started doing this work, and now it's down to 7. So that's because we're, the world we live in. And so it's like we really need to give our brain this rest, and a minute will do it. And there's been some research done on taking a mindful minute, taking a minute off. And the brain does reboot a little bit in that minute. And so that it serves us to take those minutes of silence. And people who take this on as a daily practice sometimes say that they'll do it at work. They'll just say, "I'm going to just do 1 minute." And the problem they've been working on all morning and just going around like a hamster, after that minute, boom, they thought they got what it was that they needed to get in order to finish that problem. So it really makes such a difference.
Yeah. There's a wonderful book called The Net and the Butterfly.
Mm.
Uh, Judah Pollock is one of the authors, and I can never remember the second author, and I apologize to that person. But in it, they talk about the fact that we have something called the deferred network in our brain, which actually takes 4 times the amount of energy to do what it does than our executive function, which is up in the front. Because in that silence, if you get this executive function to quiet down, then the deferred network has a chance to speak. Now, the deferred network is the one where all the creativity happens because it's making strange connections through memories and whatever. And that's why the solutions come forward, because finally it's like, you've been thinking about this. Now here's the answer.
Oh, I love that. I had not heard that before.
Yeah.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
I need to look at that up. What was the name of that book?
The Net and the Butterfly.
Net and the Butterfly. I'm going to write that down because I want to get that. That sounds like
You
something
do.
I'd love to read.
Yeah. It's wonderful. It's beautifully written too.
Yeah.
Well,
Great.
I cannot believe how much we have covered and how much time has gone by. But there are a couple of more questions that I'm really curious about. One is there something in your life that has helped you to manage a large family and a career? This is something that people, and I won't say just women, men are doing this too. How do we balance this? Is there something some secret that you would share with them?
Well, I think one of them is that I was just kind of born with a lot of energy. I have a lot of energy. I'm blessed with a lot of energy, and I think that helps. And I know everybody has different ways of being that they're born into, and so I think that's for me. I know that I count on my energy level because that's how I can manage so much at the same time. Because I have a lot of energy. I still do, and even at my advanced age, and I'm very appreciative of that. I feel very blessed by that. But a few years ago, I was thinking about, there's so many different segments of life, and as you go through life, and I thought, well, and we talk a lot about balance, balance just sounded like a lot of hard work, and it sounded to me like that if I did this, then this would suffer, or if I did that, and then I was talking to one of my daughters, and we were, and I said that just seems like a zero sum game. I don't like it. And so we said, well, what about, we looked for another word, and we said, what about integration? We integrate various aspects of our
You
lives.
stole my word. You stole my word.
Well, see, that to me is a spirit thing, because spirit plants these seeds in people
Yeah.
all over the place. And it was like, oh, great. We got more seeds planted.
Yeah.
But it's about integrating the various aspects. And it's not that one loses or one gains. It's a different season for that particular time. I mean, sometimes it's a season, sometimes it's just a day, but it's just sort of going in that flow of integration rather than the it's almost more linear of balancing.
Right.
So it's taking it from linear to organic, which is, I kind of like living life organically.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I'm just astounded. I'm thinking to myself, now, how did they know that? See,
Exactly.
to me, that integration is also a matter of knowing your values, and you may have to choose, but never in violation to your values. That's the integrating factor for me.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it. And as long as I know I'm consistent with my values, then somebody else may say, oh, she's doing the wrong thing. She should be putting more time over here. I say, no, to me, I'm okay, because it's
Oh, I
consistent.
love that. That's great. Yeah. Well, that's why there's so many of us, because we all have slightly different gifts to share and ways of looking at things. I love, hearing these other ways, the integration it's the same thing, but it's a little different because it's coming from your experience and what your life is. And that's exciting.
It's
juicy.
Juicy. Who used the word juicy was, I believe it was Hildegard of Bingen.
Oh, that makes sense.
Who talked about you have to be juicy for God. She was a very basic person, but she was an abbess, of course, as you know.
Yes. And way back in the 12th century or something like that.
Yeah.
And an amazing woman who had skills and gifts way beyond any what we knew was available in that time, looking back. But
that's right.
There she was.
That's right. Yeah. And she did all of that with what we speculate were migraine headaches. So quite a woman.
Yep. One of my heroes.
For me too. For me too. Definitely. Well, I always like to ask my guests if they have any recommendations, specific recommendations for people who are starting out in their career, or maybe they're at a pivot point in their career. Not necessarily about reflections from listening, but from your life. You obviously have a great deal to offer, Kay.
I think one of the things that I would say is that and I'm using this word again about seasons in life. There are seasons in life, and there are certain times in life when there's something that should be done and to be learned, and then it shifts. And it's in those shifting times, I think that it's kind of hard it's a transition. And from a woman who's had 5 babies, transition is the hardest part of labor. It's always good. You think it's never going to be over. I can't do this. And then the next thing, the baby's born. But so transitions in life are difficult. They can be very difficult. They're stretching you. You're having to think differently. You're moving differently. You're growing into something else. And I think the awareness of that, there are those times in life. And when you feel really stretched and things that you can look at that, well, maybe this is a transition I'm going through. It's not that this is the end of something, but I'm transitioning from this to that. And of course, there's some discomfort, and there's all this unknowing and this change and all that. But maybe that's just so I think that would be something I wish I'd known earlier that I just sort of grew into knowing.
Yeah. Well, good that you had the opportunity to grow into it, knowing.
Yes.
Ah, Kay, I cannot thank you enough. I just feel so honored to have you as a guest here on Unlocked. Your wisdom is very deep, and I really, really appreciate that very much.
Well,
So
thank
again, thank you.
you are so welcome. It's just such a pleasure. I feel like we could go on for hours, and it would be so much fun to do that. But we
I,
don't have
I have to agree, but maybe we'll schedule another time.
it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Ah, goodness, I love these conversations. Amazing what you learn. You know, resilience to me is about making that decision to move on when you're hit with the unexpected. And in order to make that decision, you need lots of data and ideas and practice in pulling things together, comparing options, and finding what looks like the best choice. And that's why deciding each morning, as we talked about earlier in the show, what is the most important thing to do for the day and doing it. It is so powerful. And as I shared earlier, it just has made my practice, my work, just explode with productivity. And I'm a pretty productive person to begin with. But it's also, when you do that, it's developing that ability to reflect on all the factors and feel the confidence that you can make that decision. So reflection from listening is such a wonderful place to start on this skill. And I am so grateful for Kay's amazing insights. You know, many people have asked me to do more to help them develop and nurture their resilience. I am particularly excited today to say that my program, which will be called Unlocking Together, is being readied to be launched. It's still being refined, so if you have an idea about what it should cover, or if you have a current challenge that you think I should be aware of, send me your thinking and send it to Madelyn@madelynblair.com. I'll be listening and reading and incorporating your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Unlocked. If you have, make a comment in social media about what you learned and might do differently as a result. Think about that 1 minute of silence. And if you're on YouTube or LinkedIn, click the like button. Better yet, subscribe or follow me. So I want to thank you again for joining us on this segment of Unlocked. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.